And we now shift our focus to key business economic issues of the day with Dr. Byoung-joo, head of KL&P Consulting and a longtime commentator here at Arirang TV. Hello, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Now, so it looks like it's not too much of a good news for the nation's CEOs, but this is something that's sure to get people talking. It looks like starting next year, Korea's top CEOs will have to disclose how much they get paid. Is that correct?
Right, indeed. We are talking about the CEOs and other quote-unquote registered directors of the board. We're talking about these board in Korea. There are certain directors of the board who are more important, whose names are registered in the court as someone who actually take the full responsibility of what happens in the corporation. So there are different degrees of directors of the board here. And we're talking about these registered directors of the board having to perhaps, most likely, to disclose how much they get paid by their corporations. And this applies to, looks like it will apply to Korea's top 200 companies. And those, the directors who get paid more than 500 million won per year. This is not totally finished, the done deal yet, but the legislature, there's a legislation review subcommittee of the Political Affairs Committee just passed the bill. They're done with reviewing the bill, and now it's moving to the main floor for votes. And these faces you're seeing on the screen, Korea's top chaebol heads such as Jung-woo, whose face you just saw, and Choi Tae-won, whose face you're seeing right at this moment, and perhaps Koo Bon-moo, the head of LG right now, they will have to actually disclose how much money they're getting paid by their companies and their groups. And Lee Gun-hee, the head of Samsung Group, will be exempt from this because he's officially not a registered director of the board. So there will be some variations here, but most of the Korea's biggest names in Korean business community, how much they get paid by their business will be disclosed, and it will be very interesting. So far, these business groups and companies have disclosed on average how much they're paying for their registered directors, but individual pay disclosure will be something that we've never seen before, and something quite historical if indeed this passes the main floor. Actually, this demand has been being made for quite some time, and there have been even demands for disclosing their performance indicators, meaning that whether what they do actually justifies how much they get paid. But the disclosure of performance indicator will not be coming. It will be only coming with the numbers of the money, the size of money they get paid by their companies.
Right. Well, I'm just out of curiosity. How is Samsung's Lee Gun-hee not a registered director? How is that possible?
Actually, in the past, it's getting less so, but in the past, it was customary for Korea's chaebol heads not being a registered director of board, because if you're a board director, you are liable for lawsuits, and sometimes you'll have to go to jail for corporations' wrongdoings and so on. So it was customary thing for Korea to exempt that kind of obligation for their heads of chaebol. But increasingly now, as you saw, Jung-woo, Choi Tae-won, and Koo Bon-moo, they became registered directors, but Lee Gun-hee hasn't yet.
All right. I suppose, needless to say, I'm sure there's considerable opposition to this idea among the CEOs themselves.
Absolutely, CEOs themselves and all the business groups that they run. Of course, they've been saying, I mean, this could actually create this great amount of disharmony within business groups, and actually they're saying this could actually encourage labor union to ask for even higher pay levels, because they're saying they could say, oh, well, CEOs get paid this much, so we deserve more raise. So there's a concern for labor relations on one hand, and also even among the CEOs, once these are being disclosed, this could be ego stuff, like if you find out as a head of LG you get paid much less than SK head, maybe you may see an urge to raise your salary as well. So the consideration for the possibility of such competition is also being aired. And so associations like FKI that represents chaebol's interest here has been quite adamantly against the idea as a whole, and they're saying this is a privacy question. So there have been many different arguments against the whole idea so far.
Right. As of now, the average pay has been disclosed, right?
Right.
For instance, I think about 3 of Samsung's registered directors got a $15 million pay last year.
Right.
But we really could not figure out how much one individual got, and that's what we'll be able to find out starting next year.
Right. I think the figure would be 15 billion, perhaps.
Perhaps
Yeah.
15 billion.
Right.
15 billion US dollars?
Billion won.
Billion won, yes,
Right,
that's
right,
correct. 15.6 billion won and
you
$15
mentioned
million.
dollars. Okay, right.
Yeah.
We have
All
to be
right.
sensitive about the figures.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Yes, 3 zeros makes a difference.
Right.
Now, how is this practice carried out in other countries?
In other countries, in terms of disclosure, United States is doing exactly that. They've been doing that ever since 1992 as a result of the introduction of this, their new financial regulation bill there. And SEC, Security Exchange Commission, has been actually enforcing this law of having to disclose your top CEOs and executives' pay levels. And in UK, they've been doing it ever since 1992 as well, as a result of Cadbury report that has called for the need for this kind of disclosure. In Germany also, they're doing it as a law. Now they have a law in place ever since 2005, making an obligation for corporations to disclose their pay levels for individual top executives. Japan, you would expect it would be one of the last countries to get into that practice too, but however, since 2010, they have been doing exactly that as well. So it looks like a global trend, and Korea is just catching up with that.
Well, as for the pros, I think it's quite obvious. One thing that I could think of is that it could give shareholders more power.
Right, indeed. I mean, Korean corporations like, and also association that represents Jabil, they're saying already Korea has given rights to shareholders to oppose this kind of, if there is a problem with this kind of raise of CEO pays and stuff, and they can review how much their CEOs are getting paid. But the thing is, actually by disclosing it to the public, now we can use the public opinion to kind of control or put a certain limit to outrageously overpaid CEOs indeed. Because if you're a shareholder there at a shareholders general meeting, it's extremely difficult to raise your voice saying, look, I think our CEO getting paid too much. That's not exactly acceptable thing for you to do in a Korean culture.
Right.
So public disclosure, they say, would be a much more effective way of enforcing actually transparency and fairness in corporate governance here in Korea, rather than just relying upon the current regulation that allows just any kind of shareholder to raise their objection to it. So it seems to be making all the sense. Korea has been making a lot of progress in improving corporate governance, and looks like this is one of the ways to further go ahead with that, since this is a global trend.
Right, and speaking of global trend, excuse me, I believe it was just a few weeks ago, last week maybe, that Switzerland passed a bill into law allowing the government to put a cap on CEO pay.
Right.
There was a say on pay kind of regulation there as well.
Right.
Now, could we say that this is exactly what Korean CEOs are ultimately afraid of?
I think that's what they are ultimately afraid of, considering the Korea's culture more like collectivist culture here, considering what happened in Switzerland. Switzerland, they don't have a legislature. They always conduct this people's vote, a referendum, and they passed a law recently, of course. And the Korean CEOs and also FKI, I'm sure they're very much concerned about this move, because the Netherlands, for one, is actually considering requiring, they're just considering it, they haven't made it into law yet, but considering requiring the bonuses to be smaller than 20% of the overall regular salaries. They're thinking about that right now. And EU actually is introducing a new law that will require the bonuses for the banking executives not to exceed their regular salary. So these kind of actions are coming into place, into existence. So I think there's a reason for Korean CEOs and their representative like FKI, Federation of Korean Industries, to be concerned about such measures coming down the road in the future, perhaps. But the way I see it, it's just possibilities. But still, for now, I think it will be important for us to go ahead with this new action that will be introduced by this new law if it passes the National Assembly.
All right. Thank you so much for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow with other business news.
Okay, we'll do.